So welcome back to Her Daring Adventure. We trust these last adventures have been daring. They've been an adventure, and you've gotten some great lessons, learnings, and insights, and there is definitely more to come. So before we move on to our next daring adventure, we want to stress again, this is the opportunity for you, looking back on the daring adventure you just completed, to take a moment to reflect on any wins you've had, successes, ahas, insights, any changes you've seen in your life from that last process. And one of the reasons we do this, as Seal has mentioned, is number one, you want to take the time to celebrate your wins, because celebrating your wins, number one, it brings up your whole mood level. It makes you realize that, yes, I have had these successes, I've had these wins, and it acknowledges you. And the second thing is, if you find at this point, before moving forward, that you don't feel like you've fully completed the past adventure, then you may want to spend more time on it, because as we say, in this Her Daring Adventure, slow is better. Take your time, trust the process, don't rush through it. That we want to make sure that you get the outcome that you set out to get. So, we all have here in our hands our journals. We talk about one of the rituals that we like to do is journaling. And for me, journaling is, sometimes I might just sit down in the morning and write where I'm at, what's happened in the past so many hours, what my thoughts are. If I have a question I'm pondering, I might ask the question and just write. I don't really think about what I write, I just write. If I'm looking for an answer, oftentimes if I just start writing, just not thinking writing, just writing, usually I get to a point where I get an answer or cognition to my question. So we all have our journals. Mine even has initials on it. That's from Seal. She gave it to me. So anything you guys want to mention about it?
Mine's from our trip to Africa. Before we really started diving into this adventure, picked it up at a bookstore before we got on that Rovos rail and took the train, up through South Africa, Botswana, and Zimbabwe. And I have a couple different journals, and I think I mentioned before, I'm not a big journaler, but I do have a few, and this one is dedicated towards when I have a thought or need to process something in regards to what we're doing, whether it's speaking around the world or a new idea, or when it comes to building this program. So just my thoughts in this one.
So my journal also, I was laughing, mine started on the Rovos rail also, this one did. So, first date in here, Rovos rail, we were in Botswana at that time when I started this one. And I do mine a little different. Mine is a running journal. So I keep a journal and I just go chronologically of any notes that I have. Sometimes I'm not sure what I want to journal, so I'll review a reading that I've had and put a quote down or a thought that I've had, and then sometimes I'll journal off of that. But I also have notes from when we've gotten together, book studies in here, and it's just a chronology of my year. It usually takes me 8-12 months to go through a journal.
It's interesting because sometimes I'll do it sporadically, but lately I've been working on a lot and great things in my life. And let's see. This is maybe 6 months. This is not from 6 months. This is from 4 months of journaling. So I've been pretty consistent, and I'll tell you, it has paid off because I've been getting a ton of insights and ahas, and I'm more dedicated to it than ever. But if there's ever something I need to handle, this is one of my go-to pieces. It's one of the rituals I practice on a regular basis. And if you've never done it, give it a shot. See if it works for you. You got to find the ritual that works best for you.
And I use mine for more like the gratitude process, but it's interesting. A good friend of mine gave me this right before we left for South Africa. Remember me telling you guys about it? And she says, my gosh, you're going to be out of the country for 30 days. So she had this mailed to me, and I got it the day before we left on the plane to fly out.
Great.
And just so that I could recap everything that we experienced when we were out teaching, out of the country. And so I use this to do my gratitude process, and I love it.
Great. So just looking back on our last adventure, we talked about How do you take a minus in your life, look at the lessons, look at the learnings so that you can turn that minus into a positive? And we all are of the opinion or of the experience that there's no such thing as minuses, because every single thing that happens is just a step in our learning. So some may be more fun than others. Some might take a little time to pull out the lesson, but every single step along our path, whether positive or negative, to us is a good thing, because we look for the lesson and we grow and move forward. So we trust that you had a good time doing that. Keep practicing that, because to us, it's one of the most valuable things you can do. It relieves stress, it relieves worry, but most importantly, it helps you become better, more successful, and a bigger, truer to yourself being.
So just to remind you, again, we've talked a lot about the 4 steps to lasting change, or the 4 steps to transformation. So we keep repeating this because we just can't stress enough how important this is in the process, and how it goes into the neuroscience and it taps into our meaning network. So first step is that information. We've given you a lot of information over the course of our adventures. Second step is action. Then we go into feedback, and last, incubation. So just remember, as you go through this process, continue to revisit those. If you have questions about any of those steps, reach out to Facebook, reach out to a friend, reach out to a mentor that can really help you walk through those pieces.
Yeah, and because, as we said earlier on in the program, is that we always thought that it was information and action that causes change. But by adding the feedback and the incubation process from science and neuroscience, they've discovered that is really what causes lasting change. So that doesn't just apply to Her Daring Adventure. That applies to anything you're taking on new in your life. That applies to your business. That applies to your personal life. Anything new that you want to take on, we would recommend using those 4 steps if you want to make a change in your life. And we also talked about rituals. We talked about mentors. Always seek out mentors for whatever you're doing also. If there's ever a shortcut to success, that would be find a mentor who's doing, a real teacher, a real mentor who's doing what you want to do. Not just a teacher who talks about it, but somebody that actually practices what they preach.
And sometimes you have to be daring in asking that person who may seem out of reach.
Yes, yes.
And take that
that's
step.
a good point, because a lot of times I've approached people who are very successful, and I say, hey, can I just spend a few minutes with you, because I just want to pick your brain on something. I'll tell you, if they are, 99% of the people I ask are like, yes, I'd be happy to share with you, because they've gone through a lot of the learning and a lot of the tough steps, and they really want to impart their knowledge on people that are truly want to learn and want to take on something new. Yeah, so don't hesitate. That's part of being daring.
Yep.
Yep. So how many daring things have you done this week? How often have you stretched and gone out of your comfort zone? That's part of, that doesn't just apply to Her Daring Adventure, that applies to the rest of your life. If you want to grow, do things that make you uncomfortable. Because I heard a great saying the other day about uncomfortable. He said, we were talking about the unknown, and he said, people always say people don't do things because they're afraid of the unknown. Mm-hmm. He said, nobody's afraid of the unknown because they don't know what the unknown is. How can you be afraid of it? But what they're afraid of is loss of the known. And I'm like, So just notice when you're hesitant about going into the unknown or going into something that you're not comfortable with. Okay, that's how you be daring.
Yep, so the teaching piece is really values. What are values? There are internal or personal words that influence our attitudes and behaviors. Our values drive our decisions. And one of my favorite quotes when it comes to values is by Roy Disney. And he says, it's not difficult to make decisions once you know what your values are. So once we know what our values are, we have our left and right limits, and we're making decisions in there. And if we go outside of our values, we'll get that feedback almost immediately. So we use values I use values when I'm going into a new business, looking at new partners, is it in alignment with my values? Does that person have the same values as me?
Boy, that's a crucial piece, because we get this question a lot, is how do I find good partners, or how do I find good business associates? And one of the lessons I've learned is that if you're not aligned on purpose and you're not aligned on values, your chance of success is zero.
Right.
There's going to be a lot of upsets.
Yeah.
Because you're going to clash.
Yep.
And you may not know it at first, but once you're like, oh, we have different values, then it's clear.
Yeah.
And you can often teach a skill, but you can't teach that value to be aligned to yours.
Right.
So when you can find those people that you are in aligned with values, hold on.
Yeah. Well, the four of us, when we did our values, very, very aligned to our values. It didn't surprise us,
Right.
because we get along so great, because we're very aligned on each other's purposes and our values, what we stand for. I consider values my personal code to live by. It's the standard I
Right.
want to operate at.
Right, that personal code that you
Yes.
live by.
That you
Yeah.
live by. And when you're building a business too, and this might be a little off topic, but when you're building a business, you want your company to have values. And they don't necessarily have to be all of your values, but what values will be in alignment with you and your company. And then you hire, fire, and train based off those values.
Yeah. You know, when Robert and I first got together, and we wanted to see how similar or different we were, we actually did this little process. And you might want to do this with your partner, your significant other, your spouse. So we took a little 3x5 card, and on one side I wrote my top 10 values. And on the other side I wrote what I thought Robert's top 10 values were. And then we compared. And it was amazing how many values we had that were aligned. And you know, that's why you're attracted to people, because you're like-minded and you're similar values. He actually had the gall to think, because neither of us had kids on our values, not right or wrong, it just at the time was not in our life. He later told me, he said, "Oh, I thought you didn't put it on your list because you're trying to trick me." And I said, "You're flattering yourself tremendously." But it's a great exercise to do with your business partner, with your personal partner, to compare with friends. It's a fun exercise, and it brings up discussion, and it also leads to you getting more clear on what your values are.
And again, your decisions are a lot easier when you know what your values are.
Yes.
So let's talk about what some examples of values are. So when we're talking about values, what are we talking about?
Well, this is funny. I don't know how this ended up in my purse today. I don't know where it came from. It was amazing, but here's my list of values. And from when we did our own process, this is the list I came up with. So one of my values was lifelong learning and growth. One was optimistic, an optimistic and positive environment, nature. These were some of my values.
Yeah, I picked up this journal, and my values are on here too, and also lifelong learner. I had honesty. I had balance.
Balance.
I had balance. I had health. Yeah.
So mine are in here too. And you know, when we went through this process, I have all of yours written in here too.
Oh, you're kidding. Oh, how funny. Oh, good. So now if I lose this, I'll know where to go. Good.
You know where to look.
Good.
So some of mine are, I'm a warrior, I'm a protector. I have that warrior spirit. Personal development, courage, adventure, you know, fun adventure, the same, and trust and abundance are just a few.
Yeah, abundance. I like that.
You can adopt that.
Yep.
And a couple of mine were, Lisa's got my list. It's really good. Like-minded friends. And when I say like-minded friends, to expand on that, basically, like-minded friends would be people who are always striving to be the best they can be in personal development, which is why I think we all get along so well. We're so aligned, it's just unbelievable. And then another one is honesty, because how can you be like-minded and in alignment if there's not honesty? So those are two of my top things that I value.
Great. So the purpose of this daring adventure is for you to define what your values are. What do you stand for? What's most important to you? And by defining your values, it's a very big step closer, because it's very well connected to what is most meaningful to you, what's most important to you. So this is a really important piece of the process, and we've built up to this point as we peel back the layers of the onion. So this is a big one. So take your time with it, and we'll get into what the daring adventure itself is.
Yep. So your next dare to act is to come up with your top 10 values. And as you're going through this process, I encourage you to come up with more than 10. And you may see that some of the words align, or you can combine them into a word that really suits who you are. So I have my little cheat sheet here because I want to make sure I'm clear on the questions I'm going to give you for your values. So you're going to take a lot of time with this and just find a quiet place, sit down, and really, really think about these. And when you do your values, you're going to think of birth to present day. And you're going to go professional and personal life, because our values shape who we are and our decisions. So you really want to go back all the way as far as you can remember.
And to one point to that too is when I did my values, I wrote down my first list, and this is where the incubation part comes in. And then I kind of sleep on it, and I'd let it sit for a while, and then I'd go back to it and I'd refine it. And then when we came together, you guys would ask me specific questions like you're about to give, Lisa, and that helped refine it even further until I got my list. And when I had my list of my 10 values, I was crystal clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tried not to overthink it the first time around, just to kind of get it on paper and list it first.
Yep.
All right, so question number 1 is you're going to identify times you were happiest and had the biggest wins. And when you write those down, you're going to identify those times and put a word with it. For example, when I was 6 years old, I walked to kindergarten my first day by myself. My dad said, "Do you want me to walk you to school?" And I'm like, "Nope, I got it." And I was happy because it had that independence in me. So I was independent was the word I came up with for that happy or big win. You're going to also think about what were you doing and who were you with and how did you feel? Because this is all going to guide you to that word for that time you were happiest or had the biggest wins. Number 2 is you're going to identify times you felt failure or mistakes, let down, and or emotionally hurt. Now, it's not always fun to go to those times, but you'll see why later, why we are taking you through this process.
Because sometimes the negative can bring up like the anti-value. Is that right?
Yeah, where someone either violated it or you violated your own value. So as you're identifying those times, write them down. You're going to also think of what need or desire was unfulfilled, and how and why did that experience give your life meaning or have an impact on you. And going through this, just again, take your time and think of the word once you have the feeling that goes with that time.
So those are great questions, and that's a great start to get you thinking about what your values are. Some of you may go, "Oh, I already know my values," so start there, but continue on the process and continue with the questions that Lisa just put forth, because there may be more and more nuances and more distinctions that you'll get, and so you can refine your list until you know it's rock solid.
The very first time I ever tried to write out my values, I was probably 41. And at that point in my life, I didn't know what my values were. When I tried to write it, I almost was in tears, because what it brought up for me was like, wow, I don't know if these are my values or they're my parents' values,
yeah.
or they're
Yeah.
the religion, the religious values that I was taught, because they're not necessarily my values. I literally didn't know what my values were because it was all kind of meshed together. I do now, but it's good to inspect and reflect. Is this my value?
That's a great question to ask
Yeah.
as you write down a value. The first question might be, is this my value or is this somebody else's value? Because I know one thing about women, we all often operate on other people's values, trying to please people, or we've been brought up to by our cultures, our society, religion you mentioned, to act a certain way. And so we've taken on and adopted values that really are not our values
Right.
at all.
Right.
So it's a really important piece.
And that's where these questions come in, because you're identifying your own personal times and you're putting your own personal words with it, because they're your time. They're your happy times, they're your big wins They're your failures, they're your mistakes, they're your emotional upsets. They're not coming from your family, your spouse. They may have had a part to do in it, but it's really your win,
Yeah.
your
It,
loss.
it can actually be really great when you recognize that this value that you've been living by all your life may actually
Not
be
be
not yours at all, but be because of the religion you were brought up, or
Yeah,
because of
yeah.
family, or because of culture. So
So think it through slowly.
think it through slowly. Yeah,
Yeah,
take your time with it, and yeah, don't rush it. Really take your time with this one. So that is the Dare to Act, and again, make sure it's your values and not somebody else's values. Again, a reminder how to implement the 4 steps to transformation. We've got the information, you've got the action to come up with your 10 values, your feedback. You're going to probably get a lot of feedback as you go through this, because you're probably going to go through a lot of emotions, a lot of feelings, and you might even get angry I would get a little angry if I found out at my age that I've been living according to somebody else's wants and needs and not mine. So you might have a little anger in there too. And you could have incredible breakthroughs. So take your time.
And a reminder to sit with that feeling. So if you're angry or upset, I like to close my eyes and just, where's that feeling in my body and why am I feeling that? And just let it process, let it percolate to the surface, because it's going to provide more clarity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have to feel it to move through it.
Yeah.
You don't want to block it.
You have
That's
to-
a good point.
you have
If
to
you
honor it.
experience it, like like you're talking about, experience it, and those feelings and emotion will start to dissipate it. But if you resist it, it's going to stay there with you. So experiencing it will start to let it go.
Yeah. So really take your time. Don't sit down and just rush through this. You're not going to get there in one sitting.
Yeah.
I don't know how long it took me to really refine it. It's probably years, but you don't have to, because I didn't have your questions. I didn't have the knowledge I have now of what awareness was and what to look for. I didn't have the feedback and incubation.
Yeah.
So we're trying to do our best. We're doing our best to streamline this whole process for you, to make it a little more gracious as you get through all the different processes.
And once you know, you'll know. You'll
Yeah.
know what that
Oh,
value
yeah.
is.
It's
pretty
you'll,
clear.
You'll know.
It'll be
that's
crystal
yours.
clear. Yep. And also the incubation process, let it sink into your psyche, let it sink into your soul. When you're awake, sometimes the answers will pop, and when you're asleep, you might wake up with an answer in the morning. Also, a reminder to keep visiting Facebook. If you have questions, we're on there. Everybody on there is most likely pretty like-minded, because they're all going through a similar goal. They're going through the same process, so use that resource. And any final words on this daring adventure?
Trust the process.
Really, trust the process. Thank you, and we'll see you for the next daring adventure.